My straight boxing coach refused to train anyone else after I quit. Gay love story. Hello everyone, and welcome back. If you enjoy emotional gay love stories with romance, powerful twists, and unforgettable endings, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. And before we begin, tell us where you're watching from in the comments. We love seeing viewers from all over the world. Thank you for being here. Now let's dive into today's story. People keep asking who made me a champion, but nobody believes me when I tell them the man who built me never trained another fighter after I walked away. The reporter smiled like I had just delivered the perfect headline, but I wasn't joking. The arena lights reflected off the championship belt resting across my lap, cameras clicking from every direction while thousands of fans slowly filtered toward the exits. Confetti still clung to my shoulders, and somewhere behind me my coach's corner should have been celebrating. Except there had never been anyone standing in my corner tonight. There hadn't been for years. I reached down, running my thumb across the worn leather wrapping of my old hand wraps tucked inside my gym bag. I carried them to every fight, even though they were faded, frayed, and probably should have been thrown away long ago. They smelled faintly of old canvas and disinfectant, the scent of a boxing gym that had once felt more like home than the apartment where I grew up. So who was he? Another reporter asked. What made this coach so different? I looked past the cameras instead of answering immediately. Beyond the bright lights, I could almost picture a dusty ring beneath humming fluorescent bulbs, a cracked digital clock mounted crooked on the wall, and one man standing with his arms folded, watching everything without saying much at all. Logan Hayes never wasted words. He didn't believe in speeches. He believed in showing up before sunrise, unlocking the gym while the streets were still empty, and expecting everyone else to work just as hard. Most people quit within 2 weeks. Some lasted a month. Nobody ever lasted a season unless Logan decided they were worth his time. Somehow, for reasons I still couldn't explain, he decided I was. Back then I was 19 years old, broke, awkward, and convinced that enough determination could make up for talent I wasn't sure I possessed. I walked into Hayes Boxing Club wearing clearance sneakers and borrowed gloves that barely fit. The heavy bag swung gently beneath old ceiling fans, each rhythmic creak blending with the steady thump of fists striking canvas. The place wasn't impressive. The paint peeled near the windows. The lockers had dents older than I was. But the ring stood in the center like it mattered more than anything else in the building. Logan noticed me before I noticed him. "You're early," he said. It wasn't a compliment. It sounded more like an observation. I glanced at the clock. 6:43 in the morning. Practice starts at 7. Exactly, I answered. His blue eyes studied me for another second before he nodded toward a jump rope hanging from a hook. Warm up. That was it. No welcome. No handshake. No introduction. Somehow that simple exchange felt bigger than any motivational speech I had ever heard. I didn't know then that every morning after that would quietly reshape my life. I definitely didn't know that one decision years later would quietly reshape his. The first week nearly sent me back home. Logan never yelled, never mocked anyone, and somehow that made disappointing him feel even worse. Every correction came in the same calm voice. Again, keep your shoulders relaxed. Your feet tell me what your mind is doing before your hands ever can. Those simple sentences followed me everywhere. I heard them while brushing my teeth, while stocking shelves during my evening shift at the grocery store, and even when I lay awake staring at the cracked ceiling of my apartment. Every morning I arrived before sunrise. The parking lot was still covered with dew, and the chilly air smelled like wet asphalt and fresh coffee drifting from the diner across the street. Logan was always there first. I never saw him unlock the building. Somehow the lights were already on, the ring already cleaned, and a fresh bucket of towels always waited beside the benches. It was as if the gym simply came alive whenever he stepped inside. We settled into a rhythm that nobody ever talked about. I wrapped my hands while he checked the equipment. I jumped rope while he adjusted the timer. He never wasted praise, but he never ignored improvement either. One morning, after I finally completed 3 flawless rounds of footwork without stumbling over myself, he simply nodded once before walking away. That tiny gesture felt bigger than a standing ovation. The other fighters noticed it too. "Coach actually nodded at you," one of them whispered while pretending to stretch. "I have been here 8 months, and I have never gotten a nod." I laughed it off, but something inside me warmed anyway. The gym slowly became my entire world. I memorized every squeaky floorboard, every faded championship photo hanging on the walls, every scratch across the heavy bags. I even learned the sound of Logan's footsteps. They were steady, unhurried, impossible to mistake. Somehow I always knew when he was standing behind me without turning around. "You are thinking again," he said one afternoon while I hesitated before throwing another combination. "Thinking slows you down. I am trying not to mess up." "You already did." My face fell until I noticed the corner of his mouth twitch ever so slightly. It was not quite a smile, but it was close enough to make the entire room feel brighter. That became our strange language. Dry comments, tiny reactions, long silences that somehow never felt uncomfortable. Every Friday, after everyone else left, Logan stayed behind to clean the ring himself. One evening I grabbed another mop without asking. He looked surprised. "You do not have to do that." "Neither do you," I replied. We worked in comfortable silence, the faint buzz of fluorescent lights filling the empty gym. Outside, rain tapped softly against the windows while traffic rolled past in distant waves. Before locking up, Logan handed me a cold bottle of water from the refrigerator. "Good work today, Evan." It was the first time he had ever said my name. It should not have mattered so much, yet I carried those 3 words home like they weighed more than the championship. Felt I would eventually earn. Looking back now, I realized that was the moment everything quietly began changing, even if neither of us was ready to admit it. Months passed so quietly that I almost forgot there had been a time before Hayes Boxing Club. My mornings belonged to the gym, my afternoons belonged to work, and my evenings belonged to sore muscles and silent determination. Somewhere along the way, Logan stopped feeling like an intimidating coach and started feeling like the safest constant in my life. He still kept everyone at the same professional distance, at least that was what I told myself. Yet small things refused to fit that explanation. If I stayed late to practice, he stayed later. If I forgot to bring lunch, an extra turkey sandwich somehow appeared in the office refrigerator with no note attached. During winter, when freezing rain covered the sidewalks, he would quietly leave 5 minutes after I did, and every time I looked back from the bus stop, his truck remained parked outside the gym until my bus finally arrived. I tried convincing myself it was coincidence. It became harder each week. The other fighters noticed it long before I did. "Coach is waiting for your opinion," Marcus joked one afternoon as everyone gathered around discussing new equipment. "He already picked the bags," I answered. Marcus laughed. "Exactly. But he looked at you first." I brushed it off, embarrassed by how quickly my face warmed. Logan heard the conversation, but said nothing. He simply continued tightening the straps on a heavy bag as though he had not heard a single word. His silence somehow made everyone grin even wider. Rumors spread through the gym the way the smell of fresh coffee drifted through the front office every morning. Some people claimed I was destined to become the next state champion. Others insisted Logan had finally found the student who understood him. A few teased that I was obviously his favorite. I hated how much those jokes secretly meant to me. One Saturday after a regional tournament, several fighters invited us to a neighborhood diner. We crowded into a long booth, laughing over pancakes and endless cups of coffee while replaying every awkward mistake from the matches. Logan almost never joined social gatherings, so when he quietly slid into the empty seat across from me, the entire table exchanged knowing looks. "This feels historic," someone whispered dramatically. Logan raised one eyebrow. "Eat your breakfast." Everyone burst into laughter except me. I was too busy pretending not to notice that he had ordered the same blueberry pancakes I always picked after competition days. Little coincidences piled on top of one another until they felt impossible to ignore. Even then, I refused to let my imagination get ahead of reality. Logan had mentioned more than once that relationships distracted athletes. He had also casually referred to women he had dated years earlier whenever conversations drifted toward personal lives. Nobody questioned it. Neither did I. He was my coach, nothing more, and I reminded myself of that every single day. Then one rainy Tuesday changed everything. I arrived early, expecting the gym to be empty, but voices drifted through the hallway outside Logan's office. One of the assistant trainers laughed and asked, "You really are never going to train anybody the way you train Evan, are you?" The room fell completely still. I stopped walking without meaning to. After several long seconds, Logan answered in the calm voice I knew better than my own heartbeat. Do not mistake commitment for favoritism. His reply sounded firm, almost distant. The conversation ended there, but the words followed me for the rest of the day. I smiled through practice, yet something quietly settled inside my chest, heavy enough that even the familiar rhythm of the speed bag could not drown it out. The next morning, I could not shake the weight of those words. Commitment, not favoritism. They echoed inside my head with every jump of the rope and every lap around the ring. Logan coached me exactly the way he always had, correcting my stance with the same calm patience, timing the rounds with the same quiet focus, never noticing that I was struggling against thoughts instead of exhaustion. Or maybe he noticed everything and simply chose not to say it. That was the frustrating thing about Logan. He could read my footwork before I threw a punch, but he never volunteered a single thought about his own heart. Spring slowly gave way to summer, and with it came the biggest amateur tournament of my career. Everyone at the gym seemed excited except me. My training was improving, my confidence was growing. Yet life outside the ring had quietly started falling apart. My mother called one evening while I was closing the grocery store. Her voice sounded smaller than I had ever heard it. The manufacturing plant where she had worked for nearly 20 years was shutting down. My younger sister was starting college in the fall. Bills had begun piling up on the kitchen counter. The apartment lease was about to increase. By the time I drove home that night, I already knew what I had to do. Boxing had never paid my rent. It had given me purpose, but purpose did not cover electric bills or buy groceries. I picked up extra shifts the following week and started missing recovery sessions. Then I skipped breakfast to save money. Logan noticed immediately. "You are losing weight," he said one morning after practice. "I am just busy." He looked at me for a long second. "Busy people still eat." I laughed, pretending everything was fine, but even my own smile felt borrowed. A few days later, he handed me an envelope before I left the gym. "Travel expenses for the tournament," he said. I stared at it without reaching for it. "I did not ask for this." "You should not have to." My chest tightened. I knew the gym did not have money to waste. I pushed the envelope gently back across his desk. "Give it to someone who needs it." His blue eyes met mine, steady and impossible to read. "I already am." I almost accepted it. For one dangerous second, I wanted to believe I could keep chasing the dream we had built together. Instead, I forced myself to smile, thanked him, and walked away before my resolve disappeared. 2 mornings later, I arrived before sunrise for what I knew would be my last visit. The gym was silent except for the familiar hum of the lights and the distant rumble of traffic outside. I placed my locker key on Logan's desk beside a neatly folded pair of hand wraps. He looked from the key to my face without speaking. "I cannot do this anymore," I said quietly. "My family needs me more than the ring does." The silence stretched between us until it almost became another person standing in the office. Finally, he nodded once. The same small nod that had once filled me with pride. Somehow this one hurt far more. "Family comes first," he said. His voice never cracked. His expression never changed. "Take care of them." I waited for him to stop me, to argue, to tell me to stay. He did none of those things. I picked up my duffel bag, walked through the empty gym one final time, and stepped into the bright morning sunlight believing I had just left behind the only person who had never truly needed me at all. For a long time, I convinced myself I had made the responsible choice. Responsibility sounded noble until it became routine. My mornings started before dawn loading delivery trucks instead of wrapping my hands for practice. My afternoons disappeared beneath invoices, phone calls, and overtime shifts. By the time I finally crawled into bed each night, I was too exhausted to think about what I had lost. At least that was the story I kept repeating to myself. Some habits refused to disappear. Every Saturday morning, almost without realizing it, I woke up at exactly 6:45. My body still expected the familiar smell of canvas, fresh tape, and old leather. Instead, there was only the tiny apartment kitchen where the coffee maker rattled louder than it should have. Sometimes I caught myself shadowboxing while waiting for toast to pop up. Then I would stop, embarrassed even though nobody else was there to see it. Months quietly became years. My sister graduated from college. My mother found a new job with steadier hours. Life slowly became less about surviving and more about breathing again. Friends encouraged me to join another gym, but I always found an excuse. None of them understood that boxing had never just been about the sport. It had been about one place and one person. Replacing either felt impossible. Then one afternoon, everything shifted because of a conversation I had never meant to overhear. I was helping unload supplies for a community charity event downtown when a familiar laugh drifted across the parking lot. Marcus. He looked older, broader across the shoulders, but his grin had not changed at all. Before I could decide whether to wave, he spotted me first. "Evan," he shouted, jogging over. He wrapped me in a quick hug before stepping back with a look of disbelief. "You disappeared." I smiled awkwardly. "Life happened." He nodded with surprising understanding. We talked about work, family, and old teammates until I casually asked how the gym was doing. Marcus hesitated. It lasted only a second, but I noticed. "It is still open," he answered carefully. "Busy every evening." I felt relieved for reasons I could not explain. "That sounds like Logan." Marcus looked down at the paper cup in his hands before quietly saying, "Not exactly." Something in his voice made my stomach tighten. "What do you mean?" He exhaled slowly. "The beginner classes are full. The youth program is doing great. But..." He stopped again. "But what?" "He never took another personal fighter after you left." I laughed because the sentence sounded impossible. "Come on." Logan loved coaching. Marcus did not laugh with me. That is the strange part. Everyone thought it would only be temporary. Weeks became months. Months became years. People offered him talented prospects from all over the state. He turned every single one down. I stared at him, waiting for the punchline that never came. "Why?" Marcus shrugged helplessly. "Nobody knows. He just says he is not looking." A cool breeze swept through the parking lot, carrying the faint smell of rain even though the sky was perfectly clear. Suddenly, I remembered the locker key resting on Logan's desk, the envelope I had refused, and the way he had simply nodded when I walked away. For the first time in 3 years, I wondered if I had misunderstood that silence completely. Marcus must have seen the disbelief on my face because he rested one hand on my shoulder and lowered his voice. "I thought you already knew." I slowly shook my head. "Nobody told me anything." He looked away toward the busy street, watching traffic drift past before speaking again. "After you left, everybody expected Coach to find another fighter within a week. He had people calling from neighboring gyms. Parents wanted him to train their kids. Former college athletes showed up asking for private sessions. He turned them all away. The words refused to settle in my mind. They floated there, impossible and weightless. "That does not sound like him." "Exactly," Marcus replied. It did not sound like him to any of us either. We stood in silence while volunteers carried folding tables across the parking lot. Somewhere nearby, children laughed as they chased each other between food trucks. The ordinary sounds of the afternoon somehow made the conversation feel even stranger. "Did he ever explain why?" I finally asked. Marcus rubbed the back of his neck. "Only once." My heartbeat quietly quickened. "What did he say?" Marcus smiled sadly. "Someone asked if he was waiting for a better fighter." He looked directly at me. Coach answered that he had already trained the one he believed in. I forgot how to breathe for a moment. My chest tightened so suddenly that I had to look away. There had to be another explanation. Logan respected hard work. Maybe he simply believed his career as a private coach had run its course. Maybe age had changed his priorities. Maybe I was reading far too much into a single sentence. My thoughts collapsed one after another when Marcus quietly added, "He also never cleaned out your locker." I blinked. "What?" "Everything is still there. Your old sweatshirt. The cracked water bottle with the blue lid. Even the little notebook where you used to write your training goals." Images flooded back so vividly that they almost felt real. The faded notebook with coffee stains on the corners. The lucky sweatshirt I wore every tournament morning. The tiny doodles I drew whenever Logan made me wait between drills. I had forgotten all of it. Somehow he had not. "That cannot be true," I whispered. Marcus gave a small shrug. "See for yourself." The drive home that evening felt longer than any road trip I had ever taken. Every traffic light gave me another excuse to second-guess myself. 3 years was a long time. People changed. Memories grew kinder then. Reality. Maybe Marcus had misunderstood everything. Maybe Logan had simply forgotten to empty one old locker. Yet another memory refused to leave me alone. The envelope on his desk. The money I never accepted. The way he had looked at me after I placed my key beside those folded hand wraps. At the time, I thought his silence meant indifference. Now I wondered if it had taken every ounce of restraint he possessed just to let me leave without making my decision even harder. By the time I pulled into my apartment complex, The sun had already slipped below the rooftops, painting the sky in deep shades of orange and blue. I sat inside my car long after turning off the engine, staring at my reflection in the windshield. 3 years ago, I had walked away believing I was protecting my family and accepting that one chapter of my life was over. For the first time since then, I found myself asking a question I had been too afraid to consider. What if the story had never actually ended at all? I spent 3 days arguing with myself before I finally drove back across town. Every excuse sounded reasonable until it met one simple question. If I truly believed the past was over, why was I still afraid of seeing that old gym again? Saturday morning looked almost exactly the way I remembered. The diner across the street still had a handwritten sign advertising blueberry pancakes. The faded mural on the brick wall beside the parking lot had peeled a little more under the summer sun. Even the crooked neon sign above the entrance flickered exactly twice before glowing steadily. It felt as though time had politely waited for me while I had been busy pretending to move on. My hand hovered over the front door for several seconds before I finally pushed it open. The familiar scent reached me first. Clean canvas, leather gloves, fresh athletic tape. It was amazing how a single breath could carry 3 years of memories. The rhythmic sound of jump ropes echoed through the building while beginners worked through warm-ups under one of the assistant trainers. Nobody noticed me at first, and I quietly stood near the entrance watching the room that had once been my entire world. Some equipment had been replaced. The walls were fresh paint. New championship photos hung beside the old ones. Yet the ring still stood exactly where it always had, quietly commanding the center of the room. Marcus spotted me before anyone else. His surprised smile spread across his face as he walked over and offered a quick handshake that immediately turned into another hug. "I knew you would come eventually," he said. "I was not so sure myself," I admitted. He looked toward the office before lowering his voice. "Coach is teaching the youth class in the back gym. They will finish in about 15 minutes. My heartbeat immediately found a reason to become much louder. "I am not here to interrupt him." Marcus chuckled softly. "You always overthink everything." Before I could answer, he nodded toward the locker room. "Go look." I followed the hallway almost on instinct. Every step felt strangely familiar, as though my feet remembered the route better than my mind did. The old metal lockers still lined the wall, their blue paint chipped by countless years of use. I stopped in front of the one that had once belonged to me. Number 17. It was exactly where I had left it. Marcus handed me a small key without saying a word. My fingers trembled slightly as I unlocked the door. The hinges creaked with the same tired sound I remembered. Inside rested my gray sweatshirt, folded neatly. My blue water bottle sat beside it. My training notebook leaned against the back wall with a faded pen tucked inside its spiral binding. Nothing had been moved. Nothing had been thrown away. On the top shelf sat a pair of worn white hand wraps I had forgotten even existed. Carefully folded beneath them was the envelope I had refused on my last day. My name was still written across the front in Logan's careful handwriting. It had never been opened. I stared at it until the room around me blurred. 3 years had passed, yet someone had quietly protected a small corner of my life as though they believed I might return at any moment. Just then I heard familiar footsteps approaching from the hallway. Slow, steady, unmistakable. My heart recognized them before the rest of me had the courage to. Turn around. I turned slowly, almost afraid that if I moved too quickly the moment would disappear like every dream I had buried over the last 3 years. Logan stood a few feet away wearing the same simple gray training shirt he always preferred, a stopwatch hanging from one hand and a towel draped over his shoulder. There were a few more lines around his eyes now, and faint streaks of silver had appeared near his temples. But his steady blue gaze had not changed at all. For several seconds neither of us spoke. The familiar silence settled between us, strangely comforting instead of awkward. Finally he glanced toward the open locker. "You found your things." I nodded. My throat felt too tight for anything more. He walked closer and rested one hand lightly against the metal door. "I kept meaning to clean it out," he said. I looked at the perfectly folded sweatshirt, the notebook, and the unopened envelope before meeting his eyes again. "No," I answered quietly. "You did not." A faint smile appeared for barely a second before disappearing again. "You always noticed more than I expected." I let out a nervous laugh that sounded nothing like laughter. Apparently not enough. The words hung between us. Logan lowered his eyes for a moment as though carefully choosing what came next. Evan, I never wanted you to leave believing you had disappointed me. Then why did you let me walk away? The question escaped before I could stop it. It was not angry. It was simply honest. Logan took a slow breath. Because you were carrying your family on your shoulders. His voice remained calm, but there was something fragile beneath it that I had never heard before. If I had asked you to stay, every bill they struggled to pay would have become something you blamed on me. Every difficult day would have carried that weight. I could not do that to you. I stared at him, unable to find a reply. You deserve the freedom to make your own choice, he continued. Even if it was not the choice I wanted. My heartbeat grew louder with every word. Marcus said you never trained another fighter. Logan gave a small nod. That is true. Why? He looked toward the empty ring beyond the hallway, where afternoon sunlight stretched across the canvas in long golden lines. Because coaching was never just about teaching combinations or footwork. His eyes returned to mine. It was about believing in someone completely. The room felt impossibly quiet. I believed in you. My chest tightened. You could have believed in somebody else. He slowly shook his head. Not the same way. Another long silence passed before he spoke again, softer this time. There is something else I should have told you years ago. My pulse stumbled. Logan folded his arms, then unfolded them again. An unusually uncertain gesture from the man who had always seemed unshakable. People assumed I kept my distance because I was cold. He smiled faintly at the thought. The truth was simpler. I kept my distance because I respected you too much to blur the line between coach and student. He looked directly into my eyes without looking away. Whatever I felt was my responsibility, not yours. You came here to build your future, not to carry my emotions. The words settled gently instead of crashing down. There was no dramatic confession, no impossible declaration, only quiet honesty spoken by a man who had spent years protecting both my dreams and my freedom. Standing there beside that old locker, I finally understood that the silence I had mistaken for indifference had been one of the greatest acts of care anyone had ever shown me. We stood there for what felt like a lifetime, saying nothing because somehow the silence finally carried the truth instead of hiding it. I looked around the locker room that had shaped so much of my life and realized I was no longer the uncertain 19-year-old who had walked through those doors hoping someone might believe in him. I had carried my family through difficult years. I had built a career. I had learned that responsibility and love were not enemies. Logan had changed too. The walls he built around himself were still there, but now I could finally see the reason behind every one of them. I reached into the locker and picked up the old notebook. A folded piece of paper slipped from between the pages and drifted to the floor. Logan bent down first, but instead of opening it, he handed it to me. It was my own handwriting from years ago. At the top of the page I had written, "One day, I want to become the kind of man who makes my coach proud." I laughed softly, shaking my head. I forgot I even wrote this. Logan smiled, warmer than I had ever seen before. I did not. Emotion caught in my throat. Were you really waiting all this time? He considered the question carefully before answering. I was not waiting for you to come back to boxing. I was hoping life would eventually give you the freedom to choose what came next for yourself. I looked at him for a long moment before quietly saying, "Then I choose this conversation." His shoulders relaxed in a way I had never witnessed before, as though a weight he had carried for years had finally become lighter. We walked out to the empty ring together. Afternoon sunlight poured through the front windows, stretching bright rectangles across the canvas. Logan climbed through the ropes first, then turned and offered me a hand. It was such a simple gesture, yet it felt completely different now. Not coach and student, just two men standing on equal ground. I accepted his hand, stepped into the ring, and for a moment neither of us said anything. Then Logan looked around the quiet gym and chuckled softly. You know, these kids keep asking why I never coach private fighters anymore. What do you tell them? I asked. He glanced at me with the same steady blue eyes that had challenged me, encouraged me, and quietly protected me for so many years. I tell them I am still waiting for the right partner. I smiled, feeling something inside me settle into place at last. Maybe you have been waiting long enough. Logan searched my face as though making certain he had heard me correctly. The quiet smile that followed was unlike any expression I had ever seen from him. It carried relief, hope, and years of unspoken feelings all at once. Slowly, he stepped closer. close enough that I could hear the steady rhythm of his breathing. "Are you sure?" he asked softly. I nodded before I could lose my courage. I have never been more sure of anything. For a brief moment, neither of us moved. Then Logan gently raised one hand and rested it against my cheek, giving me every chance to step away if I wanted to. I did not. Instead, I closed the small distance between us. Our first kiss was quiet and unhurried, lasting only a few seconds beneath the afternoon light spilling across the empty ring. There were no cheers, no dramatic music, and no audience waiting to applaud. Just two men who had spent years choosing patience over impulse, finally allowing themselves the future they had both quietly hoped for. When we pulled apart, we could not help smiling. Logan let out a soft laugh that sounded lighter than any I had ever heard from him. "I guess I was waiting long enough after all," he said. I slipped my hand into his, and together we looked around the gym that had brought our lives together long before either of us understood why. Several months later, the old sign above the entrance came down. In its place hung a new one with fresh blue lettering that caught the morning sun. Brooks and Hayes Boxing Academy. Every weekday afternoon, young fighters filled the gym with nervous excitement, chasing dreams that reminded me of my own first day. Logan still arrived before sunrise. I still showed up early enough to make coffee before the first class. Sometimes we taught together. Sometimes we simply watched a young athlete discover confidence one careful step at a time. Years later, when reporters asked again who had made me a champion, I finally gave the answer they had always expected. "The greatest coach I ever met taught me much more than boxing," I said with a smile as Logan stood quietly beside the ring watching another generation begin their journey. "He taught me that the strongest people are not the ones who hold on the tightest. They are the ones who love with enough patience to let someone grow, and enough courage to welcome them home when they are finally ready."